Hello and welcome to a special International Women's Day edition of Population First podcast, where we turn our attention to a subject that sits at the intersection of art, power, and gender: the male gaze in India's performing arts. This conversation is part of Population First's uh, podcast series. Since 2005, Population First has worked to challenge deeply entrenched gender attitudes that diminish women's agency and normalize discrimination and gender based violence. While much of this work is focused on media and popular culture, today's conversation brings that gender lens into the world of classical and contemporary performance spaces, often seen as refined, spiritual, or progressive, yet deeply shaped by patriarchal ways of seeing. In Indian classical music, dance, and theatre, women artists have long been evaluated not only for their skill and rigor, but through a visual, moral, and emotional lens, one that prioritizes appearance, comportment, and respectability over artistic inquiry. Aesthetic traditions themselves have frequently been shaped by male patrons, male gurus, male audiences largely, and male narratives, producing narrow ideals of femininity that continue to circulate on stage and perhaps even off it. Critically engaging with these inherited frameworks is not an act of rejection, but of reclamation, of asking how these forms can remain relevant, ethical, and alive for contemporary practitioners and audiences. Joining me in this conversation are three practitioners whose work spans music, dance, and theatre, who engage critically with both tradition and lived experience. We begin with Jayanthi Sundaram Nayak, a Hindustani classical vocalist and respected teacher, also someone who has a background in education. Her practice is deeply rooted in pedagogy. Jayanti ji brings a musician's perspective on how the female voice is heard, disciplined, aesthetized, and often moralized within classical music culture. Also with us is Gurleen Judge, a theatre practitioner whose work interrogates the body, gaze, and power in performance and spectatorship. Gurleen's practice allows us to think about how gender operates not only on stage but in rehearsal rooms, casting processes, and audience expectations. And finally, Harshada Jambhekar, a Kathak exponent whose engagement with a form historically shaped by courtly aesthetics and male patronage opens up urgent questions about lineage, abhinaya, sensuality, and the politics of visibility in classical dance today. Together, we'll explore how the male gaze has shaped artistic traditions, how women artists negotiate, resist, or internalize it, and what it might mean to imagine more equitable ways of seeing, teaching, and performing. So, we'll to all the three of you. Basically, I want to first go to each one of you and ask the same question. When we use the term male gaze in the context of Indian performing arts, what does it evoke for you personally as a practitioner rather than a theorist? What does it evoke for you? Any one of you who wants to go first can speak.
So, because one is already aware of the idea of male gaze equaling objectification of women, etc., as a practitioner, when you say male gaze, for me, the first thing it conjures up is perhaps it's also based on early experiences of performance is, am I overdressed? Okay. Do I look a certain way? Am I being perceived a certain way? That takes my art away and focuses on the look. So that is just one immediate thought that comes to my mind.
Okay.
Over to the
And
others.
Gurleen and Harshda ji, if you want to say something on this. Yes.
Yeah, so what I was saying about the male gaze, I think the first thing that really kind of comes to mind, and the one thing that one has to constantly deal with, especially as a practitioner, is the idea of the gaze within the narrative, because so much of the practicing has been done by men, and so much of the storytelling has been done by men, that how do you kind of reclaim those stories or find a way to negotiate those stories or retell your own stories. And I think that's kind of storytelling and how it kind of has embodied the male gaze. I think that's primarily what I deal with.
Okay. Anything that you want to add, Harshada?
Yeah, because dance is a visual art, so definitely it usually uh, in every artist mind, it is always there when I'm on stage. Am I presentable? Okay, if I am looking good on the stage, and if I'm looking very bulky, or if I'm very skinny, or my costume is appropriate, and if I am expressing the abhinaya, if I am smiling, it is being judged that she is smiling a lot, or while giving expressions, it might people might think that is it very sensuous, or or she is being overreacting, or overacting is there in her expressions. So all these things are there in our mind while performing on stage.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask again, as a supplementary to this question to all three of you, this one goes that do you see this gaze then operating more in aesthetics alone in narrative, or it is in everyday professional practice? Or how does this play out? Yeah.
I mean, see, I think there are various levels to it, and even what you I think proposed to talk about today kind of goes various, like you say, on stage and off stage. And I think there is something somebody once told me, which has really stayed with me, is that to be a woman is to negotiate. And I think it's really an interesting aspect of being an artist as a woman, that you have to negotiate because of the body that you're in, because it's the kind of, because obviously just by doing the arts, just by being in the arts, it's not redemptive in nature in that sense, as you have to work on it. So you have to work on the reform. So it's as patriarchal and can be as patriarchal as everything else in our society, and suffers from the same stigmatization and prejudice. And so it is definitely whose story is being told, how it's being told, who gets to tell it. I think it's in all of those, it's all pervasive, and hence has to be constantly negotiated.
Yes. Any other thoughts from either Harshada or Jayanthi?
So when you're asking Yogesh about whether it's in patches or whether it's something that one is dealing with on a daily basis, there is some amount of, I wouldn't call it male gaze. I'm moving away because I think we need to separate male gaze from overall patriarchal systems, because male gaze is just one aspect of it, right? Um, uh, because even somebody without toxic masculinity has this, even without meaning to, okay, objectification, even without meaning to. So certain patriarchal practices are so deeply embedded in our everyday culture, and we have been so conditioned by them that sometimes even we as women are not aware that we are practicing those things, or and thereby perpetuating them as well. Oftentimes, a lot of patriarchal practices are practiced and perpetuated by women themselves and women against women. You don't need a man to make it that way. In the earlier question, when you spoke of as a practitioner and the male gaze, the first thing that comes to mind, funnily enough, when I perform, Harshada spoke of, how am I looking? Am I laughing too much? Am I, meaning, am I coming across as a woman who is free and expressing her desire and expressing herself openly? That even dance being a visual art, music being not considered to be visual, but more sound dancing in space. In both these cases, Yogesh, what I have seen is that I am as wary of women's reactions or responses, or I used to be, to what I'm saying or doing. as in, is she too forward? बहुत is she too liberal? Okay, simple things like this. What you spoke of, Gurleen, about changing the narrative, okay, because we have lived in this wicked narrative for such a long time that we are not even aware that we are also contributing to it. And I'll give you a very simple example. When you spoke of everyday life, I have help at home and I step out to work, etc., etc. But somehow handling a lot of household chores is in my checklist and to-do list. I am not able myself to say, I don't know, whoever it is will take care of it. Hoga so hoga, right? So it's not only the woman's duty. If there is a male member, they may as well also be equally participative in those things. But in everyday life, there are a lot of things that, for me personally, as a woman, that I've been conditioned to do. And I don't mind, I enjoy doing it. I'm not looking on it as a task and as that, this is, I don't have voice and agency to speak up against it, right? And these are things that I can speak and talk about, Yogesh, because I come from a lot of privilege. And I think privilege in many ways can enable you to counter the male gaze and in its various aspects, both personally and professionally. That's something I thought of.
No, I think it's very funny because when I was thinking about, I was just going over stuff that we might want to discuss today. And I was thinking many years ago, there was this lovely World Theatre Day celebration that honored a lot of amazing women in the theatre. I think it was one of those things that they were kind of giving a platform for these people, very senior theatre artists like Vijaya Mehta, Nadira Babbar, really senior people. And it was so funny. I was working on that thing, and everybody, all of these women, they came up on stage and they had to talk about their work and how they have been in the theatre and what the theatre has meant to them. And all of them, every single one of them had stories of being a woman, being a mum, especially, and having a sick child, an anecdote about a sick child at home, but having to do a show anyway, being pregnant in a rehearsal room, but having to be like, they were all, it was very interesting that you don't hear the male artists talk about their lifetime achievement and talking about sick children. And not really, but it was amazing to me that all of these women, primarily their stories were negotiating their family life and their life as a woman with the life of an artist. And that was very interesting and very kind of, something very thought-provoking for me, that how it's a very intertwined experience for us.
Our gender roles, even if we are not consciously adhering to them. And like I said, because I come from privilege, I consider I come from privilege, that I can tweak gender assigned tasks, right? I can walk around them, work around them, and make them, it doesn't really matter in so many ways, but some again are conditioned. So how pervasive that entire aspect of patriarchy and male gaze has crept into our everyday lives in so many unseen ways that, we are in some, we really, we do know that this happens. And I think what we would want to see, like, etc., would be how do we subvert this? And maybe that's something you're coming on to later. But it creeps up in so many ways, Yogesh, right? In so many small ways. You've given a lot of food for thought that in my everyday life, where are those spaces that I am negotiating, navigating? The other thing also is that, what do we then fight for? Do we need to fight for something? Is there a fight?
Yeah, absolutely. We will get into those aspects also. But since you were speaking, I wanted to actually come to, is it within, you're a Hindustani classical music practitioner. And so I just sort of this thing here that I have to mention that very briefly, I used to also learn from her. So in Hindustani classical music, how is the female voice expected to sound, behave, or even feel? There is a certain standard setup, right? That
Yes.
everybody feels that a woman has to sound, behave, and feel in a certain way.
Yeah. So the behave aspect got kind of answered in your first question about how you
Yeah.
dress, how you appear on stage. In classical music, per se, we sit and perform. Okay. And you continue sitting and performing, you don't move too much on stage, right? But in semi classical music, and again, notice that the word semi has been attached while the form is as rigorous and as intricate and as challenging to perform. So in Tumri, Dadra, Kajri, Chaiti, Hori, the older performers, because this form of music was brought out, popularized, and sung by Baijis, Tawaifs, the courtesan culture
Yeah.
is what brought that out, right? So that was a space where women's voice, agency, and behavior expectations were at that time in the till the 1800s were largely dependent on the male gaze. Okay, so some kind of because so then your singing, your everything, and the way you use your voice. So the use of voice in pure classical and in semi-classical are two different. It's the virgin versus vamp, okay, or the Madonna whore, right? So the Madonna voice is the purest voice because a lot of classicism has been sanitized. Okay, and when I say sanitized, so you moved away from desire, or if there is desire, it can only be spiritual, right? So a song of longing in classical would differ, and the voice would differ in um, semi-classical. So the voice quality is supposed to be huskier and have that pukar in it. So, for example, if you were to say, yeah, यही थैया मोतिया हेराय गएली रामा यही थैया मोतिया हाँ Rama. Right? So this coquettishness, was expected in the semi-classical, but not so in pure classical, which would go ah ah ah. Right? So the
Okay.
voice
So basically, are you saying that there are emotional registers that women are encouraged to inhabit or sometimes even discouraged from?
I
I mean,
don't know if you're encouraged or discouraged because musically, you are supposed to evoke the rasa in your rasika, right? You are supposed to bring that emotion. So you can explore. But the idea of huskiness being associated with desire. So a big no came about from, so it's a strange thing that objectification of women happened with a lot of film music, item songs, etc. Yeah, so Munni Badnaam Hui and stuff like that. Or even that latest U Antava, right? But but in semi-classical, actually, it brings out the agency of the woman to talk about her desire. Huh. So she could say like, "Aaj main sajungi guiya," talking about herself, right? She would say that, or the film song which says, "Najar lagi raja tore bangle par," and she says, "Jo main hoti raja बेला चमेलिया लिपट रहती राजा." So here Tora Bangla is the body. Huh? तो बेला चमेलिया लिपट रहती राजा तोरे So the use of voice was encouraged here to express desire, not in classical. A lot
but
in
when
folk
you
songs.
when we speak like this, then are you saying that this also affects pedagogy now that you're a teacher yourself? Are you Do you bring in
I,
this aspect when you
yeah, I
teach your
do bring in
students?
because I think it's necessary for the next generation of performers to be aware of it. In the older generation, if you see performative play, please read the article by Judith Butler. She's done a lot of work on this for Kajri systems and Kajri singing in which is a folk form in UP, right? So women can express with their bodies whilst they're singing, playing, and use the kind of voice they have. Usme gari bhi hai. Giving abuses is also a part of that whole thing. Huh? So that part has been encouraged. So this idea of women using their voices and coming into that space, today this thumri we hear even is a sanitized version. Okay, followed by the anti-Nautch girl movement in the late 1800s. Baijis became Devis, Jans became Begum. So there is no right. तो गिरिजा देवी है ना, तो गिरिजा बाई नहीं कहेंगे, लेकिन रसूलन बाई थी, गौहर जान थी वो. हाँ, क्या अदा थी उनमें, what kind of voices they brought. So when we talk and when we want to teach, I think it is necessary for young people today to understand that what they are singing and hearing today is not the only version of an art form as they know it. It's very essential for them to explore. The choice is then finally up to them. But you will also see this virgin vamp voice complex if you look at Lata Di and Asha. Lata ji's voice, she never sang a cabaret. It was much later that, certain one or two songs, and hers was considered. She moved away from the heaviness of Shamshad Begum. At that time, Nur Jahan ki jo awaze thi, she made it this pristine, pure voice, right? Again, when you visualize, you see the white sari and a mic not moving at all, right? Asha ji's voice.
Which is why I wanted to bring in Gurleen and Harshada into this and ask them. Now, both theatre and dance obviously are very interconnected and closely linked to music. At what point does discipline slide into control, especially over women's bodies and expression? Because on one side you say, "हाँ, ये discipline है, ये हमारी परंपरा है, you have to do it like this." But then, how quickly do you slide over into control? So, I'd like both of you to speak about that if you have any thoughts. Yes. Gurleen or Harshada, whoever wants to take this, yes. Yes, Gurleen.
I think I'm not very, I think that the idea of, I think Jayanthi very nicely pointed to the folk forms and how it might kind of, an eroticization of a woman's body. And it's interesting to kind of think about that it's not just the male gaze, there's also a male ear involved in how we present ourselves.
Absolutely.
And the man is kind of prescriptive of every single aspect of performance. And I think it's interesting to cater to. I think more than control, I also feel like in the theatre there has been a lot of suppression, a lot of stereotyping, a lot of, even across movement, even some incredibly revolutionary plays that talk about various aspects of, freedom struggle or whatever, have not really looked at the woman very imaginatively, and the description and the depiction of the women. It's really quite appalling that it still continues like that. And I was curating a theatre festival last year, and I was looking at a lot of new work that had to be commissioned. And I had this huge argument with one of the gentlemen who was making a play. And he said that he's going to make a play about a village and a romance in a village. And then, of course, there were scenes of a woman bellowing atta in a corner, his mother is blaming, and just kind of in the periphery of seeing. And I just felt like, but you're a young 20-something Indian boy. Why can't you think of anything new? Why is the image of the woman? And it's just complete. This is not if you travel at all in our country, especially if you travel across the Konkan belt, the women's movement have been incredible, and women are out there, they're working, especially in tribal societies and smaller societies. You see how they are, our Koli women, they're at the center of the work. They're not at all, they're at the center of the story, and they're driving, and they're not just, the traditional idea of a woman. And I feel like that imagery and that constant...
Yes, Gurleen, I want you to just come in here, and I'm sorry about interrupting and coming in between. But you see, theatre is often seen, very often, generally people like to talk of theatre as being, it is seen as progressive. I don't know whether it really is, but it is seen as progressive. So then, how does this gaze operate in terms of casting, blocking? Because this continues the train of thought as what you were speaking about. When it comes to casting, blocking, costuming, or even funding decisions? Like,
No,
how does this work?
that's the thing. I think that that's it. It's just that that's why I'm saying, why is it known as progressive? Because a lot of left-wing movements use the theater to talk about the things that were happening in society, to talk about, to protest, and all of that, right? Except because patriarchy and a woman's story is so embedded in society that unless it is being challenged, unless the image of the woman is being challenged, it is not a fully progressive medium. I think all prejudice has to be confronted within the rehearsal room, within the director, within the hierarchies that operate in the rehearsal room. How so I mean it has been progressive, it has been used by progressive movements, and I certainly think that a lot of the street theater in our country has done a lot to talk about the various issues in the society as such. But I do think that as unless women make their own work and tell their own stories, we're going to keep seeing this repetition. And this repetition of imagery should be called out. We should constantly be like, no, it doesn't matter if you're showing, like, why can't you don't have a woman character there, then just get rid of it,
So
make a
does
female
this
voice. you
so
know
does this sort of force women performers to change the way they inhabit vulnerability, rage, or sometimes even desire? So when they sort of inhabit this on stage, does this kind of put a pressure on them to do it in a certain way and not do it in a certain way?
I do think that yes, palatability is certainly something that one thinks about, whether this is going to be, and you see that in a lot of work now, especially with work where women are, I mean, whether it's Jyoti Dogra or Maya Rao and all that, you see how it makes the men uncomfortable. You can see that it's not because they're being sometimes androgynous on stage, like a woman is not really being very womanly, how it, or taking out sounds and things that are supposed to be womanly or acting their age. You can see how it kind of gets dismissed on the basis of, on the pretext of not being universal enough or not being I mean, there's lots of prejudice in the way men watch these work also, but also there's a lot of prejudice in the way, I mean, I know a lot of men who don't read a lot of women. I mean, it's very rare to see men reading women's literature and watching women's stories and being interested in what they want to say. So I think definitely women have to negotiate how to make it more palatable, how to make it more universal story so that they can relate to all sorts of audiences.
So I
Uh,
wanted to ask, yeah, I want to bring in Harshada ji and Jayanti ji on this and ask them. So, is it a case that we are now looking at? Um, there is obviously awareness of the male gaze, very much so. It is not like it's completely people are unaware. But does this mean that women are sort of negotiating this space and performing against this gaze, or is it now reached a stage where the gaze is so internalized that it shapes even instinctive choices? Even our instinctive choices, we don't know that it's operating like this. I think Jayanti referred to it earlier, but yes, Harshada, you also want to come in here and say what you feel about this.
Being a dancer, I feel that a dancer can decide a path of gaze. You know, in Abhinay, we direct the viewer's attention. So it is in our hand. So male gaze, everybody is aware of that, but it is in my hand that how I am portraying, how I'm showing one thing, or how I am doing my Abhinay, or how I'm showing my Krishna, and I the audience becomes witness to a story that they are not. It is not about them. So I think we are now we know and how to move ahead with it.
Yeah, I particularly mean something that comes to mind is I was once watching a performance. Of course, it was Bharatanatyam, it was not Kathak. Malavika Sarukai was performing on stage, and she turned that thing around where the Naika, instead of lamenting that her lover has gone and spent the night with a rival, so instead of lamenting, she's confronting him. She had turned that around, and so while the music and the composition continued to use that lamenting this thing, but
Correct.
the body language that she was using was confronting him, saying, "Oh, were you there last night?" So like that kind of a thing is also very subtly kind of changing the dynamic.
And this is how what we have learned so far, that traditionally we have learned that if Nayak is been with some another lady, so in the morning when he will return, that Nayika is supposed to cry and to be frustrated. But nowadays these young girls, they ask us the question why she is behaving like that. Why can't she slap him? And why can't she just ask him now go away? And what is so this is young generation who is also thinking like that. And then being a medium that I have traditionally learned this, and then I am giving this legacy to another next generation. So at that time, I have to balance both the things, that this is the traditionally being we are performing, and then how you can modify it being a modern woman in today's
I
woman.
like the way you brought up the word legacy because that is very closely linked to the question that I was asking you. Kathak particularly is deeply entangled with the court culture and patronage, right? So there was always these royal courts and the dancers attached to them, and that patronage mattered so much. So how has that legacy, does it still continue to shape ideas of grace, sensuality, and femininity? Is this still, does it cast a shadow?
Um, Unfortunately, North India faces this Mughal attacks and everything. So that's why from temple um, storytelling, it shifted to Mughal court. And then to survive, all dancers, they have to be more sensuous, and then they have to change their costumes to please their emperor. And from there, everything it changes. And then there is a very fine line between sensuality and sexuality. Okay, so it is policed differently depending on who is watching. That's what I feel.
Uh, I have always seen that women dancers face this a lot more than male dancers do. However much Birju Maharaj performed, and no matter what he did, it was, you couldn't say anything. But a woman dancer, when she's doing, there is always these labels like, oh, it is excessive, or maybe what she's doing is vulgar, or sometimes they think, oh, what is this refinement? It's completely shorn of all sensuality. So, when Arundel brought Bharatanatyam back, so there was this kind of criticism also that it was shorn of all its sensuality. So, why? How is this judgment kind of? How does it still work? And do you yourself see this playing out when you perform?
Being a Kathak dancer, I'm also a a folk dancer. So, very sadly, not only male gaze, but many female artists also they differ that folk with classical. So, talking about me, for example, if I'm performing Launi, so because I'm trained classical dancer, I might express the Launi in very decent or elegant way, whereas many other dancers who are professional Launi dancers, they might dance or they might express more sensuality in that dance. So it depends upon how you are looking at the art and how you are portraying it and how you are expressing it to the audience. It is
Uh,
more.
I
You
also
made a very, you brought us to a very good point in this thing where I want to ask Jayanti ji and Gurleen to come in here where they are so is it possible to reclaim sensuality without catering to voyeurism? So is it possible to be
I just
sensual
want to
without?
say, I just want to add to what Harshada was saying a little bit to say that it is not simply the idea of what is decent and the idea of what is sensual is also in our country predominantly formatted in the caste system as well, and so that also play. So it's not simply the male, the patriarchal gaze. It's also the Brahmanical gaze. It's also the thing of like what is appropriate, who is an appropriate woman, who is an appropriate, what kind of a person is allowed in which space. which is essentially the thing about caste, who is excluded and who is included. So that is definitely one of the main things which defines this sexuality or sensuality or being overboard or being less, and who, whether she's supposed to be a prostitute and hence can exhibit all of these features, or is she supposed to be a classical artist and hence has to restrain and hence has to, like the Madonna and the Ho kind of thing. This is also very heavily influenced in our culture with caste, especially when it comes to women, and women's bodies are completely labeled within the structure.
Yeah, so I wanted you, Jayanti ji, to come in and tell us, then do you feel we are able to reclaim the sensuality, or we are then making it so aseptic, that almost anodyne kind of performance?
I have 3 or 4 points that are running through my head. So one which I brought up in and which Gurleen added on to here is about when I said I come from privilege, because I come from a background of a caste privilege. There are many things that I can do which will be all right on stage or accepted on stage. All right. And I'll say, for example, you have Malini Avasthi when she is very performative. Okay. She moves on stage, she dances, she sings beautifully. And it's highly appreciated and taken, note of. They love it. The audiences love it. But we also have a lot of purists, right? So I think in any art form, you will have a set of purists, okay, who would feel that the art needs to be a certain way. And that purist eye comes largely through this Brahminical lens of what is pure, whether it was Lataji's voice that I referred to earlier, or whether it is classical singing, ki khayal gaiki is considered to be the pure ragdhari sangeet, in which you don't bring in sensuousness because your music is all abstract. When words come in, that is when you have these ideas of sensuality and sexuality. Because, say, for example, if you don't have words, instrumental music mein, how would you know whether it's sensual or not? Very often we use the words, right? Without words, we may have a different take on certain things. Because of, in music, I would say, because in theater, you would still have it differently, because you're, as in dance, abhinaya and your face can tell different stories. But definitely, it exists that this purest voice or this purest way of performing versus ye. My question is reclaiming sensuality the only way to show agency? Is it so important? Right? Then we are again then talking about sex and desire as being our primary focal points for expression. Right? Whereas expression can and should happen in a million other ways. Anger, laughter, all of this should be perfectly okay expressions, which are usually suppressed in terms of who is the correct female. जो अभी गुरलीन ने बात किया कि वो सुशील सूक्ष्म नारी जो है, तो वो किसने डिसाइड किया कि वो ज्यादा हंसना नहीं चाहिए, पैर फैल के बैठना नहीं चाहिए. These are concepts that have been coming. It happens and it steps into. So yes, instinctively, Yogesh, we do follow many of these things. It takes time. Say, for example, I have been trying for a long time to bring a lot of, which is why I'm fond of dance, to bring a lot of expression when I sing, okay, which is not taken kindly, because that view comes that, oh, खुला गाना है, ये क्या गाना है, या खुला नाच है, सितारा दी ने डांस किया तो खुला नाचती है, हाँ उमा, लेकिन बिरजू महाराज ने नाचा तो कोई बोलेंगे नहीं. So yes, comments are there. Instinctively, some things we do follow, but as teachers, as practitioners, what we want to leave is create a generation of people who think there are compositions that celebrate the woman. There are compositions that talk of Krishna. Is a very, almost all Indian classical dance and music have this love of Radha and Krishna is a pretty gender fluid guy, isn't he? Because you have tum Radhe bano sham, right? वो भी तो है कि वो राधे बन के ही करता है, या नारी बनाए नचाए छोरियो डफ मृदंग के तालन पे रंग डरूंगी, तो वो कहती है ना, तो कृष्णा तो ड्रेसअप करता ही है, तो हमें ढूंढने हैं, वी हैव टू लुक, and as teachers or as
I,
people who bring it, we
yeah,
have to
actually,
bring this.
you're right. You're right. Actually, Harshada ji also made that point. She said that I have had my training is in the traditional grammar, but I have to now work with students who are coming from their lived reality, something else. So I have to work with both. So I wanted to come back to asking you, Harshada ji, that you want to tell us then how do we do this without completely abandoning tradition? Does the traditional format allow us enough space to explore the space, or we'll have to break the mold? What
Yes.
do you think, Ashta ji?
No, definitely it allows us, and as I always feel that we have to. Traditionally, we are very rich, and it has provided everything to us. Only the thing is the thought process of younger generation. So we need to make them understand and why it is, and if for example I am talking about the same example which I gave, that in which era that lady was behaving like that, and now you are in this era, so how you will express yourself. So that liberty I have to give to my students, and to balance the traditional and modern way, because our generation was like, okay, guru have said this, we have been learning this, and ye aise hi karna hai. So it was very rarely to ask question to our guru why it is like that, why she is crying, why she is not talking, why she is not throwing him away. But now the generation is different, and they have many questions in their mind, and they see right now it is something beyond their imagination. For example, I have few NRI students, so they don't believe in Krishna. So they feel that why he is like that means he is talking to all gopikas and he is naughty with everyone, and then why you are worshipping them. So it is very difficult to make them understand why it is like that. So we have to go back to our roots to make them understand this. To then to
How will
let
this
them.
then work? How will this work with the idea of feminist pedagogy in performing arts? So how will it work in practice? So yes, Gurleen, you want to come in? You want to tell us what you think about this? How does feminist pedagogy in the performing arts look like in practice then?
And
Given our realities, just now the way we spoke about it.
I think that that's really one really important aspect of being a practitioner today is how, and especially as a woman practitioner, is how much of it will you have to willing to invent and willing to invent a pedagogy, essentially a feminist pedagogy, which doesn't simply mean a more gender equal narrative, or more kind of all questioning, irreverent narrative. It also means how these things are taught, how there is allowing the simple allowing, like she said, that you wouldn't ask your guru a question, her generation wouldn't ask. And the fact that this questioning of the idea itself, the questioning itself is a very feminist pedagogical tool, that we ask the question and we ask who we pray to and why we pray to them, and what does the form mean, and how we take control of the form and use the form to say something that I want to say today, as opposed to a form is there somewhere ahead of me and I have to catch up to the form. As an artist, I use the form as a tool in my hand to talk about what I believe in, what I can control, what I want to speak about, what bothers me today. And this is a real aspect. I think what Jayanthi also said about how women have to be, they have to, unfortunately, I don't think it's only the women who have to do it. I think everybody has to be involved in taking this. How does this thing move forward? And we have to be allowed to allow structures to break and new structures to come up. And I think that's definitely all on of us.
Yeah, I agree with you, Gurleen, when you say that, and Yogesh, when you said, is it only women who have to take something forward? Because the narrative changes only when everybody else is speaking about it in the same way. It is not, it's like, the prosecution and the defense, right? The defense doesn't need to prove anything, right? We are constantly defending and proving that this is possible, that is possible. However, I want to bring in one aspect about Indian classical performing arts, music and dance here, is that they are so flexible. So we have a dearth of compositions, we have dearth of expressions, we have like no dearth of any of these things. We have a huge collection, and most of this is open to interpretation. So it is how educated that you are, and you pass that on to your students or to the next person. As Harshada says, we bring in your questions. Let's have healthy discussions. Let's have debates. Does that mean you want to trash tradition? No, it has its space because it came up in a certain socio-political era. That was all they knew at that time. Our certain, I don't know how much gender politics has changed, but we are moving socially in many different dimensions now. We've gone far ahead. We have so many tools at our disposal that we can definitely question what we are doing. That's one way. Gurleen said that bringing questioning is a great pedagogical tool. The other thing I would also see is that uh, a lot of open-ended discussion, a lot of reinterpretation, and people have done it, right? They have reinterpreted Sita, the character of Sita, from being the Bichari Abla Nari, right? They have reinterpreted Draupadi, etc. So that is also, I think, the beauty of that narrative, that you can reinterpret it. Gurleen, right in the beginning, you mentioned about things being repeated, and I think that's very essential because these are one-off shows. Unless and until something is repeated and shown again and again and in different ways, we will not be able to bring that as a storyline. So that's the other thing we
Right.
want to take forward.
So, I mean, I have that we are coming to the almost like the last tail lap of our discussion. So, I have now the question that I have, I want everybody to speak on this. So, what responsibilities do institutions, festivals, critics, and audiences? Because till now we've spoken about artists, right? So, what responsibilities do the institutions, festivals, critics, and audiences carry in dismantling this male gaze? What is their role? Yes, Gurleen, since you curated festivals, you want to go first?
I think very, very urgent because see in our time and the way we are in life, we can't depend on like big institutional changes of like government and big setups like that. Wherever we get space, we have to get in and make it happen. So this is a really like so if you are if whether it was curating smaller festivals that encourage these new narratives, that encourage these new voices. And it's honestly at some level this not being complacent about the lack of imagination when it comes to stories about women, when it comes to how women are represented on stage, how the structure of the this guru shishya tradition or the director at the top of the thing, how all of that is being questioned. That should be definitely a part of a process, that should definitely be included in why somebody gets funding. The kind of collaborating experience, like the kind of collaborative experience the rehearsal room is, which I think is at the core of a feminist way of working, is to kind of break down hierarchies and is to work in a way that doesn't necessarily have this all-knowing director at the helm and everybody else is like a puppet in their hands. It's truly a collaboration. That's important. It's really important to encourage these stories. It's really important to encourage artists who do not belong to a certain privilege, who do not come from a certain, to make active efforts to find stories, to find people who make work happen within their communities. In live performance especially, I think it's really important because you can affect the community around you. It's hyper local in that sense. You can really you're not making something that is being watched in the US, you're making something that might be watched within the community. So how is the artist going to take that fund and take it into their community, make work happen, change systems? These are all really important questions that we should look at when we look at proposals, when we look at new work.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You want to come in, either of you? What do you think, Harshada ji and Jayanthi ji? Do you want to add your thoughts on this?
But at an institutional level, I would say we do follow curricula of various kinds when we are teaching, whether it's dance, music, art. That is a space whenever we have is to bring in as much gender inclusive pedagogy pedagogy as we can. But more than that, unless it's implemented in classrooms, whether they are dance class, a theater class, etc., again, we came to the same things: the selection of the stories, the selection of the songs, the selection of the themes that you want to take forward, and having discussions and debates around that, so that eventually over time it becomes a part of the curriculum. Systemic change will take a much longer time, but nevertheless, we have to start putting those little bits in, right? You spoke, Gurleen, of an ad where the woman was bellowing the roti. You know that textbook image of woman carrying pot on her head, and the farmer plowing the field, and the depiction of the woman as a domestic laborer. It has taken a long time, over 30-40 years, but textbook representations are slowly changing. So also I think those images and imagery we can change very slowly. And when I say we, I mean, I really love, Gurleen, what you spoke of theater reaching a larger community. I think we need to take music to larger spaces, simplify a lot of stuff that we are singing, make it accessible, make it singable, so that everyone can join in. I mean, the entire Bhakti movement also came because of such a need, right? It came from that need for equality. So perhaps we also can push forward and start thinking deeper in these directions. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes. Harshada ji, do
We
you also feel democratization is the way ahead? What do you think?
Yes, I do agree with both of them, and I think we are blessed to be an artist where we can use our art for social awareness, and we can generate a message for a society. And then, as Jayanti ji said, that we have a lot of poetry with us, but nowadays, many new poets they are writing something, and then we can explore it, and then we can give a message to society. So it is not bounded around what it was earlier. So
You have Sneha Kanvilkar, Nasreen Munir Kabi. I mean, these are people who are doing good work. Like, it's fantastic to see, bringing out those narratives, and they're doing well. So people are accepting it slowly. May not be everyone, but it's great that that's the kind of, and that is the kind of push we need in the classical arts as well.
I'm just amazed at how you are reading my questions even before I ask them. Jayanti, I wanted to ask you now, all three of you, to name a few practitioners who are taking on this and bringing in more gender sensitive, bringing in a much more gender sensitive lens to their work. Um, I want each of you, Gurleen can speak for theatre, if you can name some names whose work we need to look out for. Harshada ji, you can speak about dance and people whose work you think we should look out for. And Jayanti ji will obviously speak about, I wanted her to speak about musicians. She's of course mentioned Nasreen and all these others who are actually doing really great work. But yes, please go ahead, Gurleen.
So this artist called Preeti Atreya, she is actually a dancer. She trains a Bharatanatyam dancer and now is a contemporary dancer. She made a lovely show recently, which I worked on, called Rubber Girl, which is entirely about how women are portrayed in cinema, in the cabaret especially, and that's a really interesting piece of work. I think Jyoti Dogra, like I've mentioned before, some of her solos are quite fantastic, whether it's Maas or a couple of other solos as well. There's Maya Rao, who does extraordinary work. Just to see Maya's aging body in the way that she deals with it on stage is in itself a lesson in what it means to be a woman in the arts. So whether it's the topic or necessarily or not, it doesn't really matter. But there's some really fantastic solos and smaller work that's happening in the country.
Of course, we know Akhtaribai Begum was one of the earliest, tradition breakers in that sense, bringing Tumri into the living room to a large extent. And she smoked and she drank and she was like right there, out there with all this thing on stage. Because even today, with everything that we speak of, there are very few spaces where women who smoke can be accepted as being anything other than chalu ladki. right? So you can imagine in art how it was. Um, I personally like Kishori Amonkar in terms of, I don't know if it is gender, working in the area of gender sensitization, but she moved away from what was expected of her as a female singer to bring in a very different element to her music. But working specifically in this area is Shubha Mudgal, is the one person that comes to mind time and again. A wonderful, warm, extremely talented, extremely aware person. And right from her Man Ke Manjeere, right long back when she had sung, that was one of the first songs that hit that. Even in Ab Ke Sawan, right? So she's used her music to be that voice, and it's fantastic. Does she have naysayers? The entire purist community has stood up against her, but you have to love her for what she brings to this space. And I think we need many more people of that ilk, coming into this.
Yes, Harshada ji.
Yeah, the dancers who have blended the traditional and modern dance styles, few of them. So I personally like Aditi Mangaldas ji. So she is a fabulous dancer, and her thoughts and those are really blending of traditional Kathak and modern is really abstract and it's very nice. Then Kumudini Lakhia ji, she used to work.
Yeah, we just lost her recently. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes, we
yeah,
lost
an
her
absolute
recently.
one.
And Shona Narayan ji. So all they have set standards
Yeah,
and benchmarks.
What Mallika Sarabhai and Sonal Mansingh,
of
if I may,
course.
because there was
Yeah.
Draupadi and Sita, both of them.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
Yes.
I want to again come to a question which I want to put to all three of you. If you were speaking to a young woman entering your field today, okay, what would you want her to unlearn? And then, along with that, what would you want her to guard very, very fiercely? So, both, I want you to talk about what you would tell her to unlearn and what you would tell her to fiercely protect. So, all three of you can come in and
So I would say that one of the things that I had to unlearn when I started to make my own work is how to be at the helm of a project, but not be a man, in the sense of not be the loudest voice in the room, not be autocratic, not be in a certain. I mean, I learned a lot from other lovely men who were interesting people in terms of their making work, but not very interesting in terms of how they dealt with people in the rehearsal room. And they felt that there was power, and power needed to be dealt with in a certain way. So I would say, definitely, as a young woman and as a young practitioner, whether a woman or not, try to unlearn that. Be okay with chaos. Chaos is not a bad thing always, um, because it's more collaborative. And I would say the thing to protect is your softness, your gentleness, your lack of knowing, your doubt. Protect your doubt. Say, I don't know. Don't have all the answers. Don't try to ask the questions. Say, I don't know. Protect that innocence.
actually, when you mentioned this, it's making me smile because I remembered I was interviewing Amrita Subhash's mother, um, and she told me of how she had worked with Satyajit Dubey, and then she worked with Vijaya Bai, and she told me that she said that with Satyajit Dubey there's all fire and brimstone, and he would rain gullies on anybody who got anything wrong from what he had prescribed, and there would be lots of screaming and shouting and even flinging things at people. I was quite taken aback when she told me that. But she said with Vijayabai, everything was written down in her little diary. So when she came there at the rehearsal, she just told you, and just in her tenor, in her tone, you knew that this is the final line and you had to fall in there. So she said that it was all so organized and like a comb had been run through everything in her thoughts. So she knew specifically what she wanted with the production. You see, with him, he would say, "तो तुम सोचो ना, तुम यहाँ सोचने के लिए नहीं आई हो." He would scream at her. And so I'm just saying that there are various different grammars like that, but very different styles of how a man conducts himself as a director and a woman conducts herself.
And
So, of
and
course,
a lot of women also follow that. At least I started out as that. That's how I was told. In fact, one of the first productions, I was co-directing with somebody, and they said, you have to be, a man, and you have to be the voice of the room. You have to control the room. And then, it's like so counter to personality. I don't want to control anything. I don't want to control anybody at any time. I just want, the thing is, that's a structural change. And I think we are, because of the way we have been taught in school and all of that, we are afraid of losing. We think of order as good,
okay.
and discipline as good. We confuse order and discipline a lot, but we can have a lot of rigor and a lot of chaos at the same time. And a lot of, like, my favorite quotes by one of my favorite directors, Anne Bogart, is, it's not a collaboration if anybody compromises. So no compromise, everybody keeps fighting till the end, and that's a really good rehearsal room, I think, and really good work happens, and really good people are made, I think.
Harshada ji, I want to bring you in here. Your daughter is your disciple, and when she came in, what like this question, what would you have told her that don't do this, but definitely do this? So, what could you have told any young student who comes to you to unlearn and fiercely guard?
Right. To first of all, when you are uh, entering into the field, or if you are willing to learn this, so first thing is you have to unlearn the laziness, because you have to have that dedication, and you have to set your mind that if you want to reach to the certain level, then you have to go for hard work and dedication. And uh, and uh, next thing which I would like to tell her, that be yourself. Okay, be yourself. Then you are free to ask questions, and uh, don't compare yourself with anybody else, because uh, you yourself can be your um, role model. You can't compare anyone or yourself to anyone with anybody. So that is the first thing which I would like
Absolutely.
to.
Everybody brings their own lived reality and what those life experiences are offering to their expression. Yes, Jayanti, what would you say to this question?
Quite a tough question, and it's
Yeah,
quite
you work
layered.
with all kinds of vintages, no? Students, you work like
Yeah.
really
Um,
young and people as
so I would
of your
say
vintage also.
cherish your questions. Yeah, come into the room, ask as many questions. So cherish your curiosity, bring in your questions. Don't be afraid. So cherish that space, and bring it out as much as you can. Um, because many people do not want to learn classical arts because they're scared to ask questions. So the second thing I would say is unlearn, is to pare away your assumptions and thoughts that you have about the art form. You know, keep that aside and come into it with an open mind. That is the only way you would be able to interpret it, in your, through your lens, right? Because if you're constantly going to be colored कि ये क्या है यार, ये गॉड को, ये क्या गॉड को वर्शिप कर रहे हैं, तो इससे तो क्या होगा, then you're already coming in with that, into that, whether you're a female or a male, I would say. So I think assumptions, and your own, just pare away to the bare minimum. Just come in like all this is new. Even if I have sung it before, I've learned it before, I've performed it before, I come into this space saying, okay, like what new can I take away from this space? Because that is how I build and change narratives. If I'm able to see that same, the stories are the same. You are a man, I am a woman, we are living on this earth, whatever, right? And that same cycle has gone on for generations. So what are we bringing into that space is only the way we look at it. So,
Okay.
and
And
that
unlearn your ego and surrender to your the art and your mentor. I think it is a very important
I
thing.
don't know. I would say surrender to the art. Mentor, I would say again, because we fall into that danger of Guru Shishya. So I have
Be
certain
careful,
different
yeah.
ways. Yeah.
Particularly considering so many instances of the Me Too charges and all which have come up, even in
No.
the area of performing
I
arts,
say
both class.
surrender to what you're learning, because then everything
True.
is new, and that way you
True.
can build your perspective on it. That's what I would.
Because it's taken a lot of courage for some of these women to come forward and speak. So they were trapped by this whole idea of parampara. They were in the beginning scared to come out and speak against their gurus, who are sometimes huge. They came with personas as large as Mount Everest itself. So, which is why it was scary. But anyway, I wanted to sort of ask each of you for your final thoughts before we close this conversation. Any final parting thoughts? All three of you, if you can, just something that comes to mind. Even if you want to recite or say something, or I mean, that's also all right. Yeah.
Yeah, no, nothing. I really don't have anything to say. It was just lovely because these are discussions that are meant for long nights and millions of cups of tea. And then again, getting into that discursive space, hearing a lot. Gurleen, something you said about a rehearsal room where everyone speaks and there will be a lot of dissent because none of us have actually come into dissent as yet. We're maintaining the social norms of a podcast. So we haven't started fighting about something, but you need not fight to dissent. But nothing really to say. So it's just been lovely chatting with everyone. Thank you so
Maybe
much.
I should have, I should have used the expression in between the nation wants to know, and maybe that would set you off. Yeah, anyway. Yes, Gurleen, any thoughts?
No, I think this is really an important conversation to be had in general, and I think that it is really the wider, like we were talking about, like it's not only the onus is not on only the women to change. However, I know that they're more predisposed to change because it affects us in a more obvious way. But I think the male gaze and patriarchy affects men a lot as well, and what they are allowed to do and what they're
Absolutely.
allowed to say and how they should behave and what is a man. And that's really a crisis too. Um, and so I think this is really a very, very relevant conversation, both on stage and off stage, and deserves to be.
Being an artist, we know that what is in theater and then singing in vocal, but it was very good to know in depthly that what exactly is been there in theaters also. So it was a very good conversation to know thoughts of each other, and it was nice.
As we close this conversation, what becomes clear is how deeply the male gaze is woven into India's performing arts, often disguised as tradition, discipline, or aesthetic judgment. For women artists, the stage has rarely been a neutral space. It has been a site of scrutiny where bodies are read before ideas, appearance before rigor, and morality quietly folded into assessments of talent. The gaze does not always appear as control. More often, it arrives as an expectation of grace, restraint, beauty, and sometimes even silence. And yet, women have never been passive within these systems. They have very smartly negotiated, resisted, reimagined, and endured. And in this way, they have shaped practice and pedagogy in ways that are frequently unseen but deeply consequential. Critically engaging with tradition is not an act of rejection, it is an act of care. It asks whose stories have been centered, whose comfort has been prioritized, and whose discomfort has been normalized in the name of continuity. As population first work reminds us, gendered attitudes do not survive only through institutions, but through everyday acts of looking, applauding, and excusing. The responsibility for change, therefore, does not rest with women performers alone, as it was pointed just now out, but with gurus, institutions, critics, curators, and audiences. So, on the occasion of International Women's Day, perhaps the most radical act is to learn how to look differently with attention rather than entitlement, and with the humility to let women define their own artistic vocabularies. I know much of what I'm saying because as a man, it's almost sounding like mansplaining, I know. But because when the gaze shifts, the art shifts too. And in that shift lies the possibility of forms that are not only beautiful, but just. So, Jayanti ji, I'm going to leave you and I'm going to thank all of you before I'm going to leave.
Just one line, okay? Do not push me for more, but it came to mind agency, voice, and agency, right? So, होरी मैं खेरूंगी उन संग डट के होरी मैं खेरूंगी उन संग डट के जो पिया आवेंगे ब्रिज से पलट के होरी मैं खेरूंगी उन संग डट के जो पियावेंगे जो पिया मोसे रार करेंगे जो पिया मोसे रार करेंगे गारी मैं दे दूंगी गारी मैं दे दूंगी घूंघटा उलट के जो पिया आवेंगे ब्रिज से पलट के होरी मैं खेरूंगी.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm not going to say anything now because I think let's leave it on these notes of this music. Thank you so much to each one of you for doing this.